Well, just for example, that we're forced to take so much of it at face value. If they're going to try and talk to us about space-time, we have to accept everything that led up to that discovery because we're not covering any of that, and we couldn't possibly have all the math behind it.
Right.
Which is what makes this all make sense. Yes. We're not doing. Yes. The structure of the class is the class is structured on the idea that you don't need anything beyond high school algebra, which is basically the equivalent of the algebra that I did in 7th and 8th grade. And so that ends up working out really well because I don't have to call up all this calculus, but it means that they never show us any derivations. And we're just given a formula and told that this represents such and such, and we have to accept it.
Right.
And it means that there's just this huge jump in reasoning.
So, for example, do they talk about things like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle?
Yes. So we're talking about that, but we don't have any of the background that makes it make sense.
Right. But the logic of, of uncertainty of where something is in an orbit or...
That, up to that point, it sort of worked. Talking about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Pauli exclusion principle, but when it gets to the point where we're talking about, we're talking about Planck's constant and, warps in space-time and time dilation and all these different ideas that just are beyond what someone should be able to understand at our level. It's it just ends up becoming rote memorization because we can't just sort of wrap our minds around it conceptually.
Right.
So I'm memorizing, for example, I'm doing my homework the other day and they're asking us how many units of beauty and strangeness and topness and bottomness the top quark has. And the thing is we hardly even know what a quark is.
Right.
We're just supposed to assume that a quark exists and it has these qualities, look them up in a book.
Right. Well, at least they're talking about a lot of the sort of base principles and terms that if there's real interest later, imagine if someone takes that class and is a writer, that they could probably incorporate Heisenberg's uncertainty principle into...
Yeah, I think that's what it is. The idea is to make us comfortable with these terms, not to give us some really profound understanding of the concepts.
Right. How many people?
Which has its place. Maybe 80.
Oh, it's a big class.
I mean, not all of them show up. Not nearly all of them show up to the lecture.
Good professor?
Yeah, she's actually really good. But the trouble is that apparently they sort of roped her in to teach this class at the last minute. I think they must have had a gap. The person who was supposed to teach it didn't do so. Because she's obviously way too senior in the department and way too good a professor to be teaching the class for non-science kids.
Sophomore puppies.
Yeah, basically. But because she got roped into it at the last minute, she has all these other commitments where she's traveling around for conferences, or one of her other obligations or roles is senior advisor to the NYPD counterterrorism unit. So she has all these other weird things going on.
Right.
That means that she's absent from lecture a lot. So we have all these substitutes who are sometimes really, really bad. So she's great and she can explain things in a really clear way.
Right.
But about maybe 35% of the time, 40% maybe, we have some weird TA or some other really junior person in the department who doesn't really know the subject matter trying to teach it to us and lecture for an hour and 40 minutes. And you just see everyone's eyes glazing over. You see the kid next to you snoring. Which never happens when she's there, but she's not there all the time.
Dusty, you would have been happy if you had a physics class in college.
I would.
Would you have?
If you had... See, you're put on the spot. It's like an interview all of a sudden.
I don't know. I could never. I didn't have any science. It's terrible.
Yeah, I think
how can you be educated and no music? I mean, I really am not educated. I told you.
I think that's a problem with Canadian education is that you have to do one thing. And you don't get the.
It's a problem with my schooling. Well, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if McGill perhaps had required more liberal arts in the first 2 years, then you would have been exposed to it.
Well, a lot of American education, it gives you that, but it gives you a very cursory view of it. Part of why I think the core is a good thing is because it makes you delve pretty deeply into some of these things. Obviously, I was just sort of trashing the whole science requirement. But I think the music requirement, music home, art home, there's something to that. The idea is for us to graduate not feeling like, well, I'm not educated, even though clearly we are and clearly you are.
Well, when I went went to McGill, you know, there was no requirement. It was just terrible. You just walked in and took what you wanted. There was no.
It was just a major requirement, or
Nothing. As
did
soon,
you have to have a major to graduate?
No. And I think after I left, shortly after in the 50s, probably they did have. They reorganized everything. But it was terrible. And here, I mean, yet I had to learn Old English for. I honored in English. Could anything be easier? You know, to honor in English. I mean, literature. Can you believe it?
Do you remember any Old English, Dusty? Can you say
No.
it? You remember?
And that's a Middle English.
Let's hear.
What's his
Oh,
name?
that I think this would actually round this out perfectly.
What's his name?
Just for a sec. Rachel's
Beowulf. That's the only
Rachel's
word I
gonna
know.
Rachel's gonna do a rendition of Middle English
But,
before we fall off our chair.
I had to do this with a straight face, especially with that camera in my face. Okay, we had to memorize all of the first 200 lines or so of the prologue of the Canterbury Tales, 9th grade Brearley English, which is of course in Middle English. So we're just memorizing sounds because, as far as I was concerned, there was no meaning behind it. I mean, clearly there was, but I couldn't discern it. As far as I know, it's a different language. It's called Middle English. It's not.
And
current English.
that was all the Chaucer you had.
Oh, we read most of the Canterbury Tales, but we had to
But
memorize.
in Middle English, or, but did you get the sense of it then?
Not really.
But there is sense to it. I mean, it's a shame.
Oh, clearly there's sense to it, but I just didn't get it.
What a shame.
Anyhow, so you'll see why in a minute.
Listen to
The
this.
prologue is one that April with the Chauve Sota, the trot of March hath perced in the rota, and bathed every vein in rich liquor of which virtue engendered is the floor.
And why do you know that?
Because I had to memorize it and recite it.
The whole thing?
The first 100, 200 lines.
Oh my goodness.
And it all sounds like that. This is why I didn't get
And what
anything
about
out
the
of it.
translation? Do you know what it means?
No, we didn't read a translation. We got no translation.
But that's senseless.
It was senseless. It was one of the most useless things I've read.
Yeah.